Charlie Chaplin was Hollywood's first international superstar and greatest paradox. A comic genius capable of tremendous cruelty to his own children and the teenagers that he tended to marry. A millionaire who lived majestically but complained about the evils of capitalism. Charlie Chaplin made people laugh, at least those who didn't know him well. In the early years of cinema, his immense talent turned him into a star on a scale now hard to imagine. There were endless lines to see his movies. He was, without question, the world's most popular entertainer, but certainly not the happiest. Chaplin's mother and grandmother had both gone mad, and he feared that he would come to the same end. He found comfort in hundreds of one-night stands with a preference for young women. He later became a supporter of Joseph Stalin, even praising the dictator's bloody purges, and he was eventually banned from America. There's no doubting Charlie Chaplin's abilities. He was an unrivaled master of film and comedy. But he was also, in the words of one of his many lovers, the most baffling man who ever lived. With The Little Tramp, Charlie Chaplin created the most recognizable character in history. With the life he led, Chaplin created one of the greatest rags-to-riches stories ever told. Few have experienced such extremes in adulation and revulsion.
He said himself that he was better known than Jesus Christ, and come to find out he was right. There were places in the world that laughed at his humor that had never heard of Jesus Christ.
You see, Charlie was such a complete autocrat that when he snapped his fingers, the world sort of moved on its axis.
Are you a communist?
I am not a communist.
He wasn't really a bad guy at all. A tortured man, I must say. Driven, insecure, enormously insecure.
He'd have been a great con man, because he could make you believe anything in the world.
By the last quarter of the 19th century, the repressing conventions of Victorian England had created a society that appeared well-dressed, well-educated, well-mannered. A society that was well on the verge of suffocating from its own prudishness and frustrated desire. A society saved in part because of a few square miles across the Thames known as South London, where there was more prostitution, more drunkenness, and most importantly, more live entertainment than anywhere else in England. In a class-segregated society, rich and poor came together in the music halls and the public houses.
In there you had all the costermongers, you had all the people of the streets in the public house, that's why it's so named. You get your work in there, you get the ladies of the night, you get your booze, whatever you wanted, you got in the public house.
It was in this world that Charles Chaplin Sr. made a living as a singer, acting out in a variety of characters and songs the plights of ordinary people. Not as successful, but perhaps more talented, was 20-year-old Hannah Hill, a singer who did hilarious impersonations of people she observed. Her stage name was Lily Harley. In 1885, Hannah gave birth to a boy, Sidney, the father, to this day, unknown. 14 weeks after her son's birth, she met and married Charles Chaplin Sr. 4 years later, on April 16, 1889, Hannah gave birth to their only son, Charles Spencer Chaplin. There is no official record of his birth, although Charlie later insisted he was born on East Street, just around the corner from the birthplace of half-brother Sidney. Chaplin wrote in his autobiography, "To gauge the morals of our family by commonplace standards would be as erroneous as putting a thermometer in boiling water."
His father went off touring the American music halls, and when he came back home about a year later, he found that he had a newborn child that he really hadn't expected. And Mrs. Chaplin had been having an affair with another music hall performer. And I think it was at that point that Charles Sr. walked out. And I think probably at that point that he began to drink very heavily.
Chaplin Sr., claiming correctly he had only one son, rarely paid child support. Hannah's son by entertainer Leo Dryden lived with his father while she, Sidney, and Charlie struggled to survive on their own, moving in the middle of the night from one flat to the next if they couldn't make the rent. Unable to perform due to blinding headaches, Hannah earned a meager wage as a seamstress. Charlie and Sidney became street-savvy gutter snipes, earning money with their wits or with their talent.
A lot of those pubs were like theatres. The children would be outside doing their own little bit of theatre, hoping for maybe a farthing or a halfpenny or a penny. And they would be tap dancing on the beer hatches outside.
Education ran a distant second to survival. The longest stretch Chaplin attended one school was a year and a half. When the poor could not support themselves, they came here to the Lambeth Workhouse on Renfrew Road. Hannah, Sidney, and Charlie were admitted in July of 1898 and separated from one another. 3 weeks after their admission, Hannah arranged for a discharge just to see her sons. They spent the day in nearby Kennington Park, eating a lunch of black cherries and tea cake, the boys playing with a ball made of crumpled newspaper and string. At sundown, they were readmitted to the workhouse. 3 weeks later, Hannah Chaplin began a 7-year cycle of admissions to asylums until she was institutionalized for good.
He would never go in a London park. He said, oh, they're places of great melancholy and make me very depressed.
Charlie's father arranged for his son to live on Kennington Road with the Jackson family of performers. For nearly 2 years, he clog danced as one of the 8 Lancashire lads. The times he cherished most were times spent with his mother when she was well. He collected memories that remained vivid for a lifetime.
I shall always remember the top room at 3 Pound Hall Terrace, where I lived as a boy. I shall always remember climbing up and down those 3 flights of narrow stairs, and Healy's, the greengrocers in Chester Street, and Ash's, the tea grocers, where one bought a pennyworth of mixed stale cake, with all its pleasant and dubious surprises.
You are my honey, I am the bee.
Most of all, he remembered the music. Music and a way of life South Londoners to this day will never forget.
Most of the songs sung by grandfather and his father, you had your greeting songs, you know, hello, hello, who's your lady friend? Who's the little girlie by your side? But you also had the very sad songs, you know, mainly about children. There was one my father would, I'll try and sing a little bit. He would have the audience reduced to tears, and it was a little boy who lost his father, and it would go, oh, I want to go to heaven for the weekend, and I want to hear the angels play. Although I'm only 7, I want to go to heaven. I want to see my daddy for a day. I've saved up all my pennies for the journey. And so, that's good. And so, this was very sad, and everybody would cry at the moment because they could associate with these sad songs. And as Chaplin's father and all this melancholy stuff, it was all there. They couldn't escape it. Couldn't escape it.
Charles Chaplin Sr. died in 1901 of alcoholism at the age of 37 and was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. 2 years later, Charlie, age 12, supplied the evidence of his mother's insanity, and she was admitted as a lunatic to Cane Hill Asylum. He and his half-brother, her guardians and sole source of support, continued to work. Sidney as a part-time merchant marine, part-time entertainer, Charlie as a bit player in a long-running stage adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. In 1908, his brother, already a star pantomimist, got Charlie a job with impresario Fred Carno and his Speechless Comedians.
Fred Carno had buses that went from one theater to another.
And my mother used to say they'd get in the bus, and not with Charlie, but this was also what Charlie did, that they'd get in the bus and they'd change their makeup and change their costume to go to the next theater, because he had all of these different sketches at different theaters.
Charlie enjoyed his craft, but always was nervous in front of an audience. Another Carno player, Stanley Jefferson, said of Chaplin, "I know he appeared standoffish and superior. He wasn't. People through the years don't know or refuse to believe Charlie is a very, very shy man." At 19, Chaplin fell in love with 15-year-old dancer Hetty Kelly. They saw each other only 6 times in 11 days before Hetty told him that she was too young, that his talk of love scared her, that she couldn't see him again. Chaplin later wrote, "The episode was but a childish infatuation to her, but to me it was the beginning of a spiritual development, a reaching out for beauty." With the exception of his mother, Chaplin formed in his 6 visits with Hetty the most powerful attachment of his youth. The next year, Charlie created a minor sensation with his send-up of a drunk. Because Sidney Chaplin was a much bigger star and too valuable to lose to American vaudeville, Fred Carno dispatched his brother on a tour of the United States. Charlie Chaplin never lived in England again.